Hello, my people. I hope that you are well. Welcome to another episode of The Accounting Officer. I know that this episode has been long awaited, colleagues. If I remember correctly, it's been 3 months since we released an episode. First and foremost, I wish to apologize for going MIA on you, colleagues. I just want to mention that it's been busy. There was a lot happening professionally, personally, and academically. If I would just tell you professionally, some of you that know me personally would know that I've switched from auditing to a more strategy career now, because I have big dreams, colleagues, and one of my dreams is to become an accounting officer on one of the public entities or any other government institution. So that's a big change, colleagues. There's a lot that I needed to grasp. There's a lot that I needed to invest my time in learning. Academically, I was writing a tax exam not so long ago. I think in the first week of October, I wrote my tax exam for my CPA program. Personally, I won't mention what happened, but all I can say is that thing doesn't come with blue lights. Sonke siyagoa. I'm sorry for saying it in Xhosa. Sonke siyagoa when it comes to that one. Skala sibaningi. Otherwise, colleagues, I really missed you. I don't want to lie. I really missed researching content. Last weekend, I was busy the whole weekend putting together content for the next few episodes. I can say now I'm ready to record again. I can't wait to bring you more content online, colleagues. So for those of you who don't follow us on social media, our Facebook and our Instagram, it's Accounting Officer. YouTube and TikTok, it's Accounting Officer SA. I encourage you to follow us, colleagues, on all social media. Let's engage on the comments sections. I saw some of the comments that are online. I responded to some of them within this period. Those that I haven't responded to, it's not to say I will not be responding to, colleagues. I will be responding. Some of your comments actually require a lot of research from the accounting officer's side. Some of them that I haven't responded to, it's maybe because I know that we are planning an episode that will address whatever comment that you have. I still encourage colleagues that if you can, let's interact online, especially from the colleagues that are currently in practice. They can assist us refine our examples, make our interpretations better. So shout out to those colleagues who are currently doing so, who are engaging us, especially on platforms like TikTok. I've seen a lot of comments from the colleagues, and some of the comments were just assisting us on the examples that we have made. It's good to know that people are happy with the interpretation of the legislation, but it was just relating to some of the examples. So I encourage this dialogue, colleagues. I encourage you to engage us on social media. So other acknowledgements that I wish to make, I also wish to make that I wish to make this acknowledgement and acknowledge the sponsor of this show, which is Amampemvu Holdings, a team of registered government auditors who are happy to service you anywhere across South Africa with integrity, expertise, and a commitment to excellence. Some of the services they provide, colleagues, it's advisory and training, which is in the public finance compliance around areas of PFMA, MFMA, National Treasury regulations, supply chain legislation and guides. They also specialize on accounting frameworks in the public sector. They will also assist you in crafting your policies, in making sure that they are aligned with the legislation. Colleagues, more support that they provide is around audit management. During your busy period of audits, they can help you in the facilitation of requests for information, guide you on how to respond to communication of audit findings from auditors. They would also assist in developing audit action plans to address some of the recommendations that have been made by your auditors. So for professional support, colleagues, in strengthening your financial governance and compliance processes, please contact Amampemvu Holdings at amampemvuholdings@outlook.com. You can also call them on 082 075 6273. I'll make sure that these details are on screen, colleagues. If we can recap from what we've discussed in the previous episodes, since we took a long 3-month break, just a bit of a recap. We did expenditure before the budget is passed. I think that was a lovely episode, our opening episode, which was episode 1. We also did public sector terms of mass destruction. Those would include your expenditures, which is irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and all the other expenditures. We also talked about accounting officers and accounting authorities, the differences between those terms. We also spoke on episode 3 with introduction to supply chain, and we also spoke about the quotations process, also spoke about competitive bidding. Today's episode, colleagues, is a special episode that will be dealing with deviations. Deviations are also part of the supply chain management processes by our government institutions. So, what is a deviation? Well, the Oxford Dictionary defined a deviation as an action of departing from an established course or accepted standard. So this means that there is an established process, but circumstances lead us to depart from the established process. So basically, where SCM is concerned, it is to depart from the normal procurement process. The departure should be approved by the accounting officer or accounting authority for public entities. This process should also be documented in the supply chain management policy of the institution. So colleagues, those who need a recap on the normal procurement process, because it's very important you understand the normal procurement process before you start engaging on deviations, I encourage you to go back on episodes 3 and 4. We've discussed the normal procurement process in detail there. So per the Treasury regulations, where we see this term of deviations, they do mention that if in a special case, I would like us to underline that in a special case, it is impractical to invite competitive bidding, the accounting officer or accounting authority may procure the required goods or services by other means, provided that the reasons for deviating or reasons for us going with other means, basically deviating from inviting competitive bids, that process is recorded and approved by the accounting officer. So in as much as we have an established process, sometimes it is impractical to follow the SCM process. It might be impractical, and sometimes it might be very much impossible to follow this process, because sometimes we need services urgently. So not to depart from what I'm talking about, I just want to make an example. Think of this: an unexpected storm. It hits the server room that manages the entire network of the municipality. The impact results basically in the following. Of course, we won't have network at all in the institution. There will be no emails or phone services. There will be no customer interactive software, which is your CRM, if it's linked to our network. Finance might not be in a position to be able to process things. Operations would also be in a position where they can't initiate a response to service requests from ratepayers. Let's make things worse. The roof is broken and maybe the server room is also flooding due to this unexpected event. In this case, colleagues, we can't really go on tender. We can't follow the normal procurement process, because following the normal procurement process would mean we need to draft and approve specifications. We would need to advertise for a certain minimum number of days, depending on which procurement process we follow. I know for competitive bidding, we would need to advertise for about 21 days. So, colleagues, therefore, with the pressures with time and the damage that is about to occur if we don't sort out the flooding in the server room, it would mean that we need to procure by other means. So maybe let's explain this term of procurement by other means, basically deviations. Procurement by other means would include limited bidding, which we will discuss shortly, colleagues. It would also include us not obtaining return price quotations within the thresholds that are determined by the Treasury instruction. The Treasury instruction that we discussed in the previous 2 episodes, colleagues, that's Treasury instruction number 2 of 2021. The third leg of procurement by other means would be procurement that occurs in emergency and urgent cases. So we will not be discussing the second leg, which is not meeting the thresholds on return price quotations. If you know the normal procurement on return price quotations, so that would mean that it's another process, basically, where we do not meet those thresholds. So I suggest again, colleagues, we go back to episode 2. No, it's episode 3 actually, where we discuss return price quotations. But now we're going to talk about limited bidding, and we will also talk about emergency and urgent situations. So limited bidding is a bidding process that is reserved for a specific group or category of possible suppliers. This is through procurement by sole source or single source. They also include multiple sources. If we could talk about sole source would mean that this supplier is the only one that supplies this good that we need. There is no competition in the market. That's why it's called a sole source. If my memory still serves me correctly, in terms of electricity generation, Eskom is still alone in that market. I know that there are new players that are coming in the market now, which is clean energy and all of that. But for a very long time, Eskom had been alone in that market. Then when Eskom was still alone in that market, that would have meant that there is no competition here. We only procure from Eskom when it comes to electricity. So for single source, this would mean that we've done our market analysis and a transparent and equitable pre-selection process is used to decide on one supplier amongst a few prospective bidders to make a proposal or to submit a bid. There could be many reasons for this, colleagues. It could be also quality, it could be also convenience, it could be time efficiencies, and perhaps also distance. I know that some state institutions are strictly using South African Airways for flights when it comes to traveling of their people. I know it's also the same on some car manufacturers. You'd find that they only prefer tires from a certain brand, maybe because that brand meets their standard or the performance of their car, and also for the safety of their customers. Maybe if we could make a practical example again in the public sector for single source, you'd find that maybe in a small town like Berkeley East, there's only one petrol station And if we allow other bidders to come in when we need fuel, that would mean that we need to wait for a very long time for delivery. But in Buckley East, if the petrol station is just here, we can always procure from this petrol station that is just here. So that's what we mean about single source. We have a pre-selection, not that there is no other people who are providing this same service in the market, but we have this pre-selection because of certain reasons that we have, that I have mentioned, which would include distance and time efficiencies and quality in most cases. On multiple source is also the same as the single source, but the market is open also to a limited number of bidders, colleagues. Another leg of the deviations that are faced in the public sector would be emergency situations. So an emergency situation is a serious, unexpected situation that poses an immediate risk to life, to health, to property, to the environment, which calls for urgent action, and there is insufficient time to follow the competitive bidding process. So even here, if we follow this process, it would still need to be approved by the accounting officer or the accounting authority. For example, let's think about a fire emergency. Let's say in our municipality, out of nowhere, there is a field fire that happens in the bush, and the fire becomes so big and it's so windy that it's starting to blow into the side of residential areas. In this case, we happen to also face, maybe making this example more practical, that the capacity in the municipality to curb the fire is not sufficient to deal with the fire. So there is a problem that is bringing an emergency situation, or it's bringing a threat to our residential areas, basically posing a risk to properties of our ratepayers. So in this case, the municipality, if there is a private service provider that provides the same services like fire engine services to build up capacity in the municipality to assist the municipality in curbing the fire, the accounting officer would need to go for this option. So this fire emergency situation is an emergency situation that the municipality would need to deal with. Practical example of this, a real life situation. Look at what happened in Los Angeles. I think this happened earlier in this year around February, where fire started hitting residential areas. I would like us to talk about the last aspect of a deviation in the public sector, which could be an urgent case. An urgent case is where elite delivery is very much critical and invitation of competitive bids is either impossible or impractical, of course, not due to poor planning. So if we would go back to our flooding incident in the server room, we would need a company to immediately come through and make sure they drain the water, and also making sure that the safety of the equipment is protected and the equipment is not damaged. So we would need a specialist to come and drain out the water. Colleagues, while speaking about deviations, I do want to be critical and do want to mention this, that going on a deviation, it should not be an excuse for poor planning. There are municipalities in this country that face flooding incidents each and every year in the same areas. It could be township, it could be their suburban areas. They face flooding situations. We are currently in a rainy season. For sure, they will face these flooding situations in the same areas. If you would allow me to be a bit controversial on a personal opinion, we can't really be entertaining deviations on such incidents. Every year, you are facing the same problem in the same areas, yet you want to pass a deviation. That is poor planning, colleagues. That is poor planning. Again, I said it's a personal opinion. Please don't sue this channel. At least I did not mention which municipalities are. They know themselves. I won't mention them. So again, speaking about deviations, deviations are not an illegal way of doing things, colleagues. Neither should they be an excuse for poor planning. I will keep repeating this phrase of poor planning. The National Treasury has put in place instructions on deviations for PFMA and guidance for MFMA. This would be part of your supply chain regulations that guide the crafting of an SCM policy on MFMA. These guides still need to meet the objectives of enhancing compliance, transparency, and accountability in the supply chain. So with that being said, each and every deviation should be interrogated together with its reasons. Again, we should avoid poor planning, colleagues. Before we conclude this episode, I wish for us to speak about policy matters now when it comes to deviations. The guidelines that Treasury is giving us when it comes to deviations will always mention that the accounting officer and the accounting authority must provide for procurement by other means, meaning procurement through deviations in the institution's supply chain management policies. So it shouldn't just be on paper on Treasury. We should also be prepared for emergency situations and how to manage emergency situations. So this should not only exist on Treasury's paper, it should also exist in our internal supply chain management policies. So the guides would mention that the supply chain management policy should at least provide for procurement by other means and any procurement by other means that may be utilized. The policy should also provide for plans to manage reliance on procurement by other means. Again, what are we doing to avoid situations where we are having flooding in the same areas each and every year? It's right here in the blueprint that the guides from Treasury will mention that we need to have plans in place to manage reliance on procurement by other means so that we make sure that some emergency situations are not self-inflicted. The SCM policy should also include processes to be followed in respect of identifying prospective suppliers, recording and approval of procurement by other means, so of procuring through deviations. This should be documented in the SCM policy. You should remember, colleagues, that section in the Constitution that relates to supply chain that we made an introduction on in episode 3. We said that a supply chain management process should be fair, equitable, and transparent. There are other attributes that they mention. I can't remember them at the back of my head. This is very important, that the policy should include these circumstances that would lead to procurement by other means. The policy should also include an assessment of all instances that give rise to procurement by other means. As I mentioned in my small rant not so long ago, that we need to assess all the reasons. We need to interrogate the reasons of going on a tender by other means or procuring by other means. Using a deviation should not be a normal thing unless circumstances dictate that we follow the deviation process. Other important requirements, colleagues, that the accounting officer would need to be aware of when it comes to deviations is that the accounting officer or accounting authority must report within 14 days to the relevant Treasury and also to the Auditor General of South Africa in a format determined by National Treasury. So the 14 days starts immediately after the procurement has been finalized. It must also be reported in the annual report in a format also determined by National Treasury. I know that in the MFMA that any deviation that has occurred, it should be presented to the following council meeting. Immediately we face a deviation. In the next council meeting, we should be presenting that deviation and the circumstances that led to that deviation. The accounting officer should also confirm if the goods that they are planning to go on deviation on are not already procured through a transversal contract by Treasury. If that is the case, colleagues, then that accounting officer would need to consult with Treasury and perhaps ask Treasury to facilitate them being allowed to procure through that transversal contract. The guide also states that they can't solicit any bids for the same service until the existing tenure of the transversal contract lapses. This now, colleagues, brings us to the end of our episode on deviations. Important pointers, colleagues, when it comes to deviations is that any deviation should be approved by the accounting officer or the accounting authority when it comes to entities. The triggers or the circumstances that trigger deviations, these should also be documented in the SCM policy. I love how wild the SCM regulations go. They would also even mention, if my memory serves me correct, the procurement of animals. That is also part of a supply chain process. It's there on the SCM regulations. Again, all these situations should not be used as an excuse for poor planning. I will keep echoing that, colleagues. Thank you so much, colleagues. Again, I encourage you to interact with us on social media. I encourage you to please subscribe to our YouTube channels. Follow us on TikTok. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. Please repost our content if you are happy with it. So let's engage on the comments, colleagues. Let's engage. This process will also help us improve and always give you our best when it comes to this content. We are committed to excellence, colleagues. Thank you so much. And thanks to our sponsor again, Amambemfu Holdings. Thank you.